The next item on the agenda, if I can get back my agenda here. Now, we have a presentation. We've been given a report from the taxi drivers. We got, how many is it? We've got 4 taxi drivers here with us. We've got Gerard Mackin, Eamon Martin, David McGuinness and Jim Waldron, who are all members of the Taxi Forum. And just to point out that the way this committee is set up, it's never been possible to have taxi drivers on it, which I always think is a terrible shame. So I did set up a special public transport subcommittee, and we've got Jerry Brennan on that. But I just thought it would be good today to have more voices in, because the more people we hear from, the better. So we wanted to hear from the taxi drivers and maybe have a bit of an interaction and some questions to you, and maybe you have some questions for us as well. So you've given a written document to us, and basically I want to throw it open to the members here if they have any questions for the taxi drivers, and we'll start that way, and then maybe if you have some questions for us we can come back. So Councillor Anya Clancy.
Thank you, and apologies that I have to leave early just today, so I was anxious to get to talking to the taxi drivers, because I think in the report you have submissions for more one taxi ranks and to be off the side streets. I'm really just summarising the report for myself, and if there's anything I've left out, maybe you'd highlight it and make us boldly aware of it. But also that you want to be in strategic spots, I think, off side streets, and use loading bays in the evening, which, just on reading the report, while I fully sympathise with your plight, might be problematic for other reasons. And then I kind of wanted to bring up myself and maybe it's off this report, but the Georgia Street crisis at night, and Danger Street and Wexford Street and Camden Street, crisis of a backlog, and how are we going to get to the butt of that? I mean, if you bring a visitor down there, it looks like Hollywood and it's fantastic. Night 2, it's a nightmare, and it must be a nightmare for you guys too. So while I appreciate your plight, we need the streets free and flowing at all times of day and evening for safety reasons, as well as for comfort, for tourism and for us, the residents of the city. So I just really hope that I've kind of maybe not summarised your plight too flippantly, but that you maybe could come back to us and that we can work together. And I think the Chair has highlighted the fact that it does seem odd that we've nobody from the Taxi Federation represented on our strategic policy group, but we do have on our subcommittee group, which is very, very welcome, because you are a big cog in the wheel of the whole transport and traffic issues that occur in the city, and you're a very vital part of the lifeblood of Dublin City. So that's me in summary, just to say that I'm in support. I'm highlighting the issues of Georgia Street, Camden Street, Danger Street. We've got to do something about this. It can't be allowed to go on, I think, a day longer. I think there are issues around the loading bay for different reasons, that retailers need loading bays at night time and all of that, and you need to be facilitated in some way that will, we can meet in the middle. So I just wonder, maybe you throw at us, what ideas do you have out of what I have summarised, and if there's anything vital that I've left out, maybe that you would throw it at us. Thanks very much, Chair.
I'm going to take another few questions first, and then you can come back in. So, Councillor Paddy McCartan.
Thanks, Chair. I think the RDS example, as quoted, is typical of the chaotic indiscipline that prevails there and at other venues. And it's like a mad scramble to pick up fares wherever they can. Now, would it be possible to have some form of uniform taxi stewarding could be provided under overall Garda control to supervise orderly behaviour at major events? We've seen these illegal stands, they're all over the city, particularly the Georgia Street, and I have photographs of them, where drivers park for business wherever and whenever. And the new taxi bylaw amendments 2011 are ignored by many drivers. And those who are compliant are the ones who lose out. There's queuing without fear outside popular shops and restaurants. drivers who respect the law, they don't get their share of the business. And this is one of the problems. And in fact, the lawbreakers are rewarded. And many of the taxi drivers seem to be from maybe more recent arrivals in the country and may not understand the rules, but they should do so. Now, the question is then, if the taxi rank requests are acceded to, will the taxi advisory group ask their members to park only at the agreed legal ranks? Otherwise, the whole exercise is a waste of time. Thank you.
I think I might let you take those two to give you a chance to come in there. And who's going to talk first? Jim Waldron.
How are you doing? Can I just outline, first of all, that the taxi forum is made up of various different constituents. I myself am from the National Private Hire and Taxi Association. Dave is from the Taxi Tammany in Heron. Eamon is a taxi driver from the Gresham Street rank, and we brought him along relevant to the Lewis line. And Jerry Mackin is a member of the Taxi Alliance of Ireland. We have other constituents. John Usher will be the Taxi Federation, and Jerry Brennan is NITA. In relation to the first thing about George's Street, from our point of view, there's not an awful lot we can do to help in George's Street. Dublin City Council, in their wisdom, gave out 11,000 taxi plates, and that's the problem. So there's too many taxis. Everybody agrees that, including the NTA. But the NTA could help you. They could buy back some of the plates. So I think most taxi groups have requested that the NTA buy back plates, and that would give people opportunities to get out for various reasons. A lot of taxi drivers might consider going back into education, but they can't get out because they can't sell that plate. So that's that one. In relation to the ongoing problems, that comes down to enforcement. And again, the NTA have, I think, 9 enforcement officers to look after the whole of the country, not just Dublin. And you know, this. I'm sorry, I can't say the name of the gentleman in front.
Paddy McCartan.
Paddy is right. People who break the law get away with it, and they're more rewarded than people who don't break the law. All our associations encourage people to work within the law, and we actually try and report people who aren't working within the law, and we encourage people to use various apps and things like that to make these reports. You know. Your stewarding question, again, taxi drivers are calling for this for years. And something like the summit last week, 10,000 of the top IT people in the world come into Dublin, and not one of them could get a taxi because there's no official taxi stand at the RDS. It's shocking. So we sort of set up unofficial ranks in that case, and we can be penalised for setting up unofficial ranks. So we pull up outside the RDS. We stand to get, under the new legislation, a €100 fine. We can also get demerits for it. So, you know, we want enforcement, but we want it done properly. But we do feel that the Dublin City Council should be coming in here, and they shouldn't be given permission for these summits unless taxi and other transport arrangements are put in place. So when the convention centre decides they're having a convention for Alex Ferguson, like last week, 3,000 people turn up to see Alex Ferguson, and they all walk out together and there's no taxi rank. I think it's very unfair, you know, on them people as much as it is on the taxi drivers trying to earn a living.
Okay, Councillor Edie Wynne.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to agree with my colleague, Councillor Anya Clancy, when she said that taxi business should be represented on this committee. It's the other representative groups, and they're a key group. So I think it makes sense that if they wish, they should have an opportunity to be represented. The idea of them not being being inside streets, from my knowledge of the situation, people are quite apprehensive about being in the city centre after dark, or not in the main thoroughfare. So where other methods of transport are on the main thoroughfare and available, it seems strange to be suggesting that taxis should be inside streets, even just from a security point of view, that people would be less inclined to use side streets. Again, I'd agree with the fact that there should be a condition of licensing for all major events in the city. If where it's feasible, again, the practicalities of the thing. Loading bays. There are loading bays, many of them in the city, I'm sure a survey could be done on this, that are not used by local businesses after opening hours or even after the first half of the day, and already there are arrangements in place to transfer them for other usage. And I think that this is definitely something, because I see there is a time when the taxis can be very quiet and then suddenly there's a surge of business and the place is empty. So, you know, I think that they should be facilitated. So, thank you.
Councillor Kieran Binchy.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the members of the forum for attending today. I'm slightly confused about the different groups that each of you are representing, that it sounds like that there could be... it's unfortunate there isn't just one person or one body that we can deal with, but I agree completely with what the other members have said, which is that there should be a representative of the taxi industry on this committee because of the importance of taxi transport to transport and traffic in the city. And I think we should all remind ourselves that taxis get a bad press quite often, but taxis are a really important part of any sustainable transport system, because a good provision of taxis in the city centre will encourage people to take public transport in, get taxis back out, or to move around the city, and encourage city dwellers not to own their own private transport. So I think we should be encouraging taxis. The numbers are quite astonishing when you give them of the number of plates. And I think that's a matter for national government. It isn't something that City Council is going to change realistically. What we can change is the provision that's made for how those taxis occupy our streets. And there's without doubt a problem here at the moment, that these illegal taxi ranks around the city. And when you have a problem like illegal taxi ranks, in my thoughts, there's two ways of dealing with it. One is, and I kind of gather Councillor McCartan is making a strong point on this, one is that you turn around and you say that the behaviour is illegal and therefore shouldn't be tolerated. But as a policy makers and decision makers, we also have to look at the reasons for the behaviour. And if there are large taxi ranks forming organically in different parts of the city, we must ask ourselves that therefore there must be a demand for spaces for ranks, and we should be looking to accommodate the taxis. I know we dedicated new ranks recently since I became a councillor, and I know there's a review of the operation of that, but I do think we need to look at seeing where we can. I see there's a shopping list in the report provided us. I'm not saying that we should exceed the shopping list, but I think we do need to look to see where else we can provide it. The second thing I would say about the ranks, besides the fact that we do need to provide extra space, is this idea of flexibility. Loading bays. There's areas of the city in which there's a demand for parking during the day and not a demand for parking at night from private citizens. So is there provision in the bylaws as they are at the moment, or would we need to change the bylaws in order to have ranks that only operate for certain hours of the day that might, I think the classic example being Dawson Street, where, well, actually it won't be, there's no parking on Dawson Street at the moment, but that idea that we could have a rank in the evening but not during the day, and therefore we're flexible on it. The final point I would make is that the idea of events, and I do think we should, if a licence is given for an event, we should even look into the person being granted the licence making provision on private property for taxis. So that, for example, the RDS, which have a fine-sized car park, that they provide parking and space for a rank, so it's not always the City Council who has to provide the space on the main street, but that the RDS, if they're being used for an event, they include provision on site for a traffic rank. And I presume that the taxi drivers would be happy with that kind of a solution, so it's something that needs to be explored by the events section.
Yeah, absolutely, and just again to agree with my colleagues, the situation that we don't have taxi drivers on this committee is just farcical. Interestingly, also we're not allowed to have Dublin Bus, we're not allowed to have the Dart, we're not allowed to have the Lewis, we're not allowed to have private coach operators. That's why we set up the subcommittee, which does have all of those people, including the taxi drivers. So it's a crazy system, and I think it's something that's going to have to be revisited. I'm going to let you take those two questions, and then I'll take more questions then.
Just on the side streets again, we're very disappointed. I want to just put this in, that the Lewis is now taking over, or attempting to take over, the taxi rank, the main taxi rank in the city outside the Gresham Hotel on O'Connell Street. Now, we dispute the measurements that the RPA are giving, and we're hoping to retain some of the spaces in that particular location. But the alternative we were given for that particular suggestion was we would be given an additional 8 spaces in Marlborough Street. Now, I don't know if any of you walk to get a taxi. Would you walk from O'Connell Street to Marlborough Street, get your taxi? I don't think so. Would you go down the side street or down the side lane around the Calvert Brewer Street? We all know what problems are around in a lot of these dark places. And I know I certainly wouldn't want my mother or my wife to be going down the dark streets looking for a taxi. So, I mean, Dublin City Council have to take this on board. We're needed where the people are, and the people are on O'Connell Street, and that's where we should be. In regard to the load bays, I just want to emphasise a huge amount of the loading bays are time constrained. Like, they stop actually being loading bays at certain times, and then people just park their cars in them. So, I mean, this again is just blocking up the street. Somebody parks their car, and fair play, to get a free parking spot for the night, that's fine. But I mean, if we're part of the public service, we have to be given access to the public. I just want to emphasise one other thing. I don't think people realise or take on board that the taxi is the only door-to-door public service vehicle. And we really have to be considered more in the planning that's taken on board. I think we've been overlooked. I know there's something else on the agenda later on about demerits for honking your horn after late night and that type of thing, And a letter was sent in requesting from Dublin City Council that drivers should be awarded penalty points for honking the horn. Well, we feel like if Dublin City Council wanted to, they could have approached the taxi forum. We are all different groups, but we meet once a month regularly, and we share ideas and visions for the future. And each of the groups have booklets and newsletters we send out. I mean, I have some here for examples. I leave them with just for each other. But I mean, we could put in our publications requests and appeals to drivers what you're talking about. So, we should be considered as part of the system, and not just, oh, by the way, the taxis are down the road there as well.
Before we finish here, or before you leave, we'll probably take that item on the agenda while you're still here, so that we can have a proper discussion on it. Jerry, did you want to come in there?
In relation to the rank marshalling, we're more than in favour of it. And we're all looking for it for some time, and the event organiser should provide the service, and we're totally in favour of it. So if it could be pushed ahead in relation to that, it'd be marvellous in our eyes, anyway. I'm
going to take Derek Peppard now, and then we've got a few more as well want to come in.
Okay, a few points and questions. One thing I'll mention is there's a good system in the airport for managing taxis. I'm not sure who runs it or how it's organised, but it works, and they chaperone the taxis in on passengers, and they take them in. It's quite efficient as well. They take them in batches of about 5 or 6, which is probably more efficient. And can anything like that be rolled out? I am certainly in favour of the idea of assigning loading bays, because there's a lot of demand for taxis at night, and loading bays aren't used much at night. So I think there is scope to look at those options. I fully support the idea of licensing events, that they should cater for taxis, and even also events should also take a view at trying to do public transport, or not public transport, the high capacity buses and stuff like that as well. It is worth pushing events to have transport plans, and obviously includes taxis. There's one I would like to push or see it done is around technology. There's such pervasive use now of smartphones. I don't know much about the Halo app, but there's a lot of stuff with technologies. And for taxis to communicate between each other, they have their, well, I don't know to what extent people still use the little walkie-talkies, but there are communication systems. So I imagine if you go back to the airport model, I'm not sure how hard it is to replicate that you have smallish taxi ranks that are clearing quickly, and instead of having taxis queuing back up the road, that they're somehow communicating amongst themselves that in fact, I would be very in favour of going back to the side streets model, that they're nearly queuing areas for taxis to feed onto the small, high-flow ranks, if that makes sense. Hasn't supposed to be all queuing up, say, on a busy main street. In principle, I'm opposed to taxis taking up prime urban realm spaces and having queues of taxis on the likes of O'Connell Street, or top priority places where we want to have urban spaces given over to people and not necessarily parked taxis. So I am in favour of side streets, but I'd like to see them managed better. I'm not necessarily asking or encouraging that people have to go, as you said, wandering down to Marble Street. If there were better systems that the taxis could queue up in the side streets and somehow feed quickly onto what you would call your prime locations. Councillor Sean Paul Mahon.
Yeah, I don't envy any of the taxi drivers. 11,000. The solution to the problem isn't going to be. It's going to be years being found. They're talking about events. Every you have Croke Park, RDS, Lansdowne Road. You have multiple exits. So every area would have to be looked at separately to see. There could be designated taxi ranks on day of events, but as I said, they would have to be all looked at separately to see where the best locations are. And bring in the bylaws, temporary bylaws for taxi ranks, as along with an event. I thought we were going to be talking about the bylaws, and I just want to bring up one specific issue that's been raised with me, and I've witnessed it, where Connolly Station, where Securicar pulls up every second day in the middle of the taxi rank, parks their van, unloads their money for guts of 20 minutes, half an hour. There's only 6 taxi spots, or 6 or 7 taxi. The taxi men have asked, this is our taxi rank. No, we can do whatever we like. But I presume that they can't do whatever they like. A taxi man moves out of that spot. He gets fined if he's parking elsewhere. And you have Securicar can do whatever they like. For 10 o'clock in the morning, it's usually 10, half 10 in the morning. I don't know whether the lads are familiar with this, but 10 o'clock in the morning, the Belfast Sligo train comes in, people are coming down. It's the busiest morning, and are we, who looks after looking after these taxi ranks to make sure that there's other places for this particular van to park on a day? So if we're going to bring in bylaws, let's implement the bylaws with the new taxi ranks around the city, or if we're going to look at temporary taxi ranks to go with an event, bring in bylaws to say, OK, this is for instance, coming out of Croke Park, as I said, there's 20 different entrances. You come up to Drumcondra Road, there's 100 taxis. There's a place there that you could say that this is a taxi rank for the day. Anywhere else, you can't park. Something in that line. Thanks.
To respond to some of these things, and then we'll take you back in again so that we can hear some of the replies, and then we'll let you come in. So.
Thank you, Chair. Well, in relation to the general issue about taxi ranks, the Traffic Department is currently reviewing the taxi stand bylaws. The immediate priority is to deal with the Lewis Cross City construction stage, because obviously that impacts on the city centre and on quite a number of taxi locations, and that matter is in train. Further to that, we're also reviewing the wider area and looking at a complete update of the existing 2011 bylaws. The existing bylaws allow for 529 24-hour spaces and 214 evening spaces, and there are some occasional spaces, 26 number. So there's 769 taxi spaces in total. There are some very useful points have been raised today, and certainly we would take them on board in our initial draft, and obviously then there's a public consultation process for review of the bylaws. But essentially the bylaws only relate to the provision of parking space on the street, on the public street. As you're all well aware, there's limited public road space, and there are a lot of other competing and growing demands for that space for other uses. And the City Council essentially has very little role in the enforcement of the rules of the road, which essentially is down to the Gardaí and the general traffic law, and also then in the regulation and monitoring of the taxis. But be that as it may, certainly we would intend to go forward on that basis. As the opportunity arises, and it was part of the written submission in relation to the O'Connell Street rank, I think it's worth just addressing some of the points. And this has been discussed previously, but I understand that there are different approaches. But essentially, the Traffic Department certainly accept there's a very strong argument and justification for taxis at the northern end of O'Connell Street. And we would be very proactive in trying to secure that. However, the existing taxi rank location coincides with the proposed location for the new Lewis Cross City platform. And so it's a very, very tight space, and it'll be a very busy location. Because that Lewis station, it won't be a typical station, it'll be probably the busiest station, I would say, in the city. It's on the main street of the capital city. There will be a lot of people getting on and off the trains, and also it will be on the median, the very wide median of O'Connell Street, which is a through, and will be much more so, a through pedestrian route for pedestrians. So we think it's extremely tight, and what we're doing is we're trying to establish an appropriate location away from the Lewis station that will provide an acceptable level of service for the taxis, and more particularly for the taxi customers, at a less crowded space on the street. And we're actively looking at the options at the moment, and once we have developed a proposal that we can recommend, we will be bringing it forward to the committee.
We haven't heard from sorry, I can't see your John, is it? Eamon, yes, Eamon. I'll take Eamon and then David, because we haven't heard from either of you.
Okay.
Yeah,
just to respond to the points made there. First of all, I think we would disagree that the busiest stop, Lewis stop, will be the one at the Gresham Hotel. We expect, obviously, the busier stop will be the earlier stop in O'Connell Street, which will be just over O'Connell Bridge, because that's the one where the people will interchange with the red line. Okay? That's the first point. The second point, in relation to what's available at where the Lewis is going to stop, up to the Gresham Hotel. The available space at the moment, the median that's going to be used, is 6 metres. That would be from the west side of the median to the east side of the median, where the taxi rank already exists. That's 6 metres at the moment. And I've demonstrated with the photographs there, they're taken from 2 different locations that are similar orientation. When the Lewis stops, it's unusual for the passengers to alight from the right-hand side of the driver. But that's the way it will be in O'Connell Street. So I've taken measurements from Harcourt Street, which is similar orientation. The people will alight there from the right-hand side of the driver. And the distances are clearly marked. I don't have to explain them to you. You can see them on the photograph. At Harcourt Street, from the rear of the station to the track on the left-hand side of the driver is a particular distance that you can see there. And in O'Connell Street, they will also need, from the left-hand side of the driver, they will need a distance that will take in a traffic island which will house a signal for the tram, which you can see in the photograph B. The vertical pole there is that houses the traffic signal for the tram. And you can see that there's traffic passing by on the right. So the distance there is clearly marked. You'll notice there's metre sticks on both occasions for distance, and that's 217. And both of those distances combined amount to less than the 6 metres available at the Gresham rank, as we call it. So we don't see any reason why there's actually 11 centimetres to spare. So we can't see any reason why the taxi rank shouldn't be retained on the east side. That's the 13 spaces on the east side of the taxi rank in O'Connell Street. We don't see any reason at all, because as far as I'm aware, there are no changes to the east side of the median in O'Connell Street. But I'm not sure if I'm correct in that. But in any of the plans we've seen for the Lewis coming down O'Connell Street, there are no changes to the east side of the median. And in this, so we're proposing that there shouldn't be any change, that the 13 cars that exist at the moment, the taxi rank, the portion of the taxi rank, should be retained. That's my submission.
David McGuinness.
Just to re-emphasise, Andrew, what the other taxi drivers are saying today, the huge problem within our industry is the lack of consultation between officialdom and the taxi driver on the street. Now, even if you take the proposed changes to the taxi ranks regarding the Lewis line, they were issued out to the taxi driver. No taxi driver had an input, from what we know, into the decision making of how these places came up on, what type of survey or strategy was taken into account when the proposed changes to particularly to the Gresham rank and the Molly Malone rank were taken into account. So I think the lack of consultation with the industry is huge. You do say that you have one of the representatives on a subcommittee of this. In the 5 years that I'm involved with TTNH, I have never heard one feedback from any committee within Dublin City Council. So maybe an email to the organisations about what went on at the subcommittee. But the whole thing about the taxi forum is, and how it came about, is that the drivers on the street have pushed this upon the representative bodies. They've told the representative bodies to get your act together, we're getting killed on the street here. And what's come out of that is the taxi forum, that the people that are over these representative bodies have woke up to the fact that acting ununified or in a singular manner is getting nowhere for the members that they represent. And if you take into account that there's 11,000 taxi drivers in the city, it's the largest employment group in the city, bar the public service. So it should be treated with that respect. And if decisions were being taken about other employees or a self-employed group with that number, they would be consulted about everything that happens to their industry, where the attitude from the taxi driver on the street is there is no consultation, things are forced on us and they can't do anything about it. So I think that is a huge problem, and through consultation you have a bit of give and take, and all problems within the industry could be sorted. And maybe it would be incumbent upon Dublin City Council then to, if the consultation process was good, to communicate with the National Transport Authority and the Department of Transport regarding solutions that the taxi industry itself puts forward to the blocking up of Georgia Street all the time, or the illegal ranking. I mean, nobody wants more enforcement in the industry than the driver who's actually out there trying to make a living legitimately.
Jerry.
I would like to ask another question in relation to the bylaws being changed by Dublin City Council in relation to the rickshaws. They're in direct competition with taxis. They're unlicensed, they're uninsured, and they're unsafe. And I just wondering what. I'm hoping this is the right area to put the question in, but in relation to the changing of the bylaws, I know Galway have done it. What is Dublin City Council going to do in relation to the rickshaws, and if they're bringing in a bylaw to get rid of them, keep them, or we're not informed very much about that with the rickshaws.
Okay, Manager, do you want to take that question, and anything else there? Maybe you might want to respond to the O'Connell Street as well.
Okay, I'll just comment on the rickshaws. We have actually drafted a set of bylaws which haven't actually gone on display yet, but the reason it happened was that there was a bit of confusion over the actual legal status of some of these bikes, and it's all very subtle and nuanced, and I can't claim to be an expert, but they're classed as pedal cycles, most of them, which wouldn't mean that they need to be regulated as a small public service vehicle. Some of them, however, have some sort of a hand throttle on it that activates the motor. They, we feel, may be liable to be regulated as an SPSV. So we have been in talks with the NTA actually as recently as Monday on this issue. So you can take it that we'll be doing something on this within the next month or two. So we are aware of the issue. We are aware of the problem. It's just not as easy to solve because of the grey legal area around some of these rickshaws.
Just to respond as well, just in relation to the O'Connell Street rank, the proposed Lewis station, it will be busy not just from passengers, but it will actually be quite a substantial pedestrian thoroughfare as well. So that location will be extremely busy. And in fact, once the Lewis track is constructed in the median, it will essentially leave only 2 metres of curbed, between the curbs, if you like, for the platform and for all uses on the platform, plus for if there was a rank, that's if you were to retain a rank. So essentially you would have 2 metres for pedestrians walking up and down, people getting on and off trains and people getting on and off taxis, plus all of the furniture associated. So from our consideration, taking account of proper levels of service and safety and comfort and reducing the hazards, essentially it's just too tight a space to fit everything. And unfortunately that's where the station is going to be. But as I said earlier, the Traffic Department fully accepts the strong argument and justification for taxis at the north end of O'Connell Street, and we're fully proactive on that basis, and we're looking at alternative locations. A number have been suggested. We're evaluating them from a technical feasibility point of view in the first instance, and we're also consulting with the various other considerations, as I say, the other demands for public space that are there and that are represented elsewhere. And between all of those, we expect to come back with a recommendation, and we would be putting it to the committee once we have that. But certainly our objective is to safeguard the level of service for taxis and, as I said, in particular for passengers.
Okay. Councillor Paddy McCartan.
Chair, could we clarify then the position? We have various representatives on this SPC from road hauliers, who I must compliment Frank for his regular attendance, and Fiona, and also the Cycling Forum. Now, we also have representatives from the Automobile Association, and they never seem to appear at this committee. So is there some impediment to inviting, or what steps could we take to have somebody from the representing taxis if there are 11,000 taxis in this city? And it's a vital, I think the point was made that it's the only form of public transport that will bring you from your location back to your own door. So I think it was a very enlightening contribution made by the various speakers there, and I think there should be some element of, there should be some representation on this committee. So
I would strongly agree. I think there's going to be a new committee set up next May, so I think we'll be giving that recommendation to whoever the new committee. So, you know, because this, after the elections, there'll be a whole new committee. But it's been a huge frustration, the way that the legislation is set up, so that you have to have various groups represented, which excluded so many really important players here. But we did our best to try and include them, and I think in the intervening months that I think we should stay in contact with the Taxi Forum. But there'll be a new committee next year, and that's the time to make sure we can get everybody represented on it. Well, we certainly should be looking at it and lobbying for it. I think it's something that's really important. Okay.
Just a quick question. The draft bylaws for the taxi ranks, when do we expect to have them, and when do we expect them to go on public display?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, our immediate priority is to establish interim taxi locations, taxi rank locations for the Lewis cross-city construction stage. And in fact, there is facility to provide those under the existing bylaws because of their temporary nature. So we have those in draft form, and we would be hoping to move those before Christmas so that they're in place for the construction stage. Then we'll turn our attention, and we already have begun surveys on the ground. We would turn our attention to the full review of the bylaws. So I would expect that it would be of the order of March of next year when we would have a full draft ready for display. And obviously then there would be facility. We will in the meantime obviously take on board any representations we get, but there would be a facility for further representations at that stage.
Okay, Jim, do you want to wrap up there?
Just a couple of things. First of all, Derek mentioned the feeder ranks. We're very much in favour of using streets as feeder ranks, as long as we get into the key points of the city. So that will be a welcomed idea. I'd just like to point out to Tom that when the Lewis proposal for O'Connell Street was put forward, there was absolutely no taxi rank on O'Connell Street. And it's only by our pursuance of it now that it's been considered in a sense, and we don't want it to be overlooked, obviously. Again, in relation to how the system works at the airport, I just want to outline very quickly that it doesn't work as smooth as it might appear to work, that the drivers in Dublin Airport in the month of August waited an average of 2 hours and 14 minutes per fare. Okay, so it looks good, but there's actually 2 holding areas with 1,500 taxis queuing all the time. So, 300 taxis queuing all the time. The rickshaws obviously is a concern of ours. I mean, at a recent international soccer match, and there's one on again this Friday, so you can test it out on Friday. The taxis were being waved on by the police, and the rickshaws were allowed to stand there all the time. There were probably 500 rickshaws, I would imagine, queuing and blocking up the streets, but the taxis were waved on because there's no official taxi rank. And the official taxi rank that is on Lansdowne Road is closed on the day of the match. So again, it brings us back to the major events that we have to be considered. And then the removal of ranks in the past seemed to slip under the radar a little bit. Princess Street, at the side of the GPO, we made allowances, or at least Dublin City Council made allowance for the bike scheme. And although the bike scheme was very successful, again, it didn't come into consideration that there was a taxi rank there. I believe that the bike scheme is going to be doubled, tripled, which, fine, but does that mean that we are going to suffer again? I hope not. I just want to highlight that. And the other one was the Westmoreland Street rank, just outside the Weston Hotel, was closed down, was moved forward away from the hotel. And again, I believe there was an accident that took place outside of the Weston Hotel from somebody unloading on the bus, and because of that, the rank was moved forward. Okay. The Weston Hotel has a side door on College Street, and they could all, disembark from the bus there. But yet we were moved on to make room for them in the lay-by, where we're actually sitting in the lay-by in a very convenient space. And now in the new spot, now people have to walk out onto Westmoreland Street to get into our cars, and they're more prone to an accident themselves. So, I'm just realised it's going to be removed totally as well with the new Lewis as well. So we're losing quite a lot of spots as well. I think there's Tom might know exactly. I think is it 91? It's 57 spots we're going to lose when the Lewis goes in, and instead of us getting more, we're actually losing them. So unless anyone else wants to say, that's all I have. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay, well, look, I think that there's certainly an appetite here to keep in touch and maybe have you in again before this committee winds up next May. So we'll do that. Okay. While you're here, I think we should, address the issue that's on the agenda of where is it? Item number 5, which is the use of car horns at night by taxis. It's probably not exclusively taxis, but there is a serious problem in the city centre for people who are living in the city centre. Dawson Street, Leeson Street, Georgia Street, where at around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning there is extensive use of car horns, and it's just for people who are living in the city centre, it's unacceptable. So I very much welcome your proposal, David, that you bring that back to your members and inform them how those habits have to change. But we have a response from the NTA there. We got that written response, did we?
Item 5.
Yeah.
Basically, it says that this doesn't fall under the demerit system because it's a breach of the rules of the road in itself, so it doesn't fall under that.
Okay, well, what I would suggest is that we need to also ask the Gardaí to, if it's a breach of the rules of the road, to ask the Gardaí to intervene. And that, you know, it also could and should be considered as a normal penalty point issue for all drivers, not just taxi drivers. And I think that would probably be the fairest way of dealing with it. It should be, you know, because if it's not a penalty point issue, it's very unlikely to be enforced. But once it becomes a penalty point issue, then it's more likely to be enforced. So can we contact the guards to ask them to enforce it in the city centre, and also then write to the Minister of Transport to ask him to consider it in the next, whenever penalty points are being considered again? Okay? Is that agreed? You wanted to come in on that, Eamon?
Just to say, we might ask the guards to enforce it citywide.
Yes.
Not just in the centre, in the suburbs also. It's a problem in the suburbs for people.
Problem as well. Okay. Very good. Yeah.
Just on that, Andrew, like all of us, all the groups have ways of communicating with their members, and like we will put a text out to that effect, or in what other way the other groups communicate with their members. A couple of signs along the affected streets. If you go to New York, it quite clearly tells you, do not even think about honking your horn in this area and all that stuff. So the City Council can play its part as well. The worry among taxi drivers when we see in the letter from, I don't know whether it was this committee, requesting that a demerit point be put on a PSV licence for this offence, the effect of this can be catastrophic on people's families. The demerit scheme suspends people from their jobs. So I think for the effect that would have on, I think the councillor, whoever proposed this to the National Transport Authority, jumped the gun. I think once again it gets back to communicating with the representative bodies within the industry, and before you propose something, maybe you should think about the effect that will have on some taxi families.
Like, I don't know how a guard is going to implement, you know, who's blowing their horn, you know, in the middle of a busy street. You know, how do you prove that? You know, you can pick up a mobile phone and say, yeah, you were on it. But honking a horn is a different...
As the representatives of the taxi industry have pointed out, in other countries, and it's not just taxis, it's cars generally, you go to New York, you go to cities across Canada, but it's an offence here too. It's an offence there, and you have signs warning you that it's an offence. Very few people do it, and if they do it, they are prosecuted. So it can be prosecuted. All it will take is a guard to attest in court to the fact. That's the point that we're making. Very few people in this country have been prosecuted. While they have been in North America, they are prosecuted regularly, and nobody does it. So I think what we're all agreeing is that drivers, including taxis, can be prosecuted easily. It's not currently done. We need to talk to the guards and ensure that it be done, rather than saying something can't be done.
Sorry, look, it's not because they're an easy prey. It's because this issue was brought up by residents of the city centre. It is but there's a huge problem. What are you going to do? No, they're not. They're not blowing their horns at 3 o'clock in the morning. 50 or 60 cars blowing their horns simultaneously. Yeah. Okay. Well, nothing's been done about it at the moment, and I think something needs to be done about it.
May I just, you know, taxi drivers probably are honking the horn at 3 in the morning because, as Paddy mentioned earlier on, the illegal guy is at the top blocking up the whole situation. If there was proper enforcement, proper policing in the area, there'd be no need for guys who are 20 minutes sitting in a spot waiting to get by the street. So you're right, you should be calling on the guards to enforce the laws, and that's what's required here.
Okay. Thanks. All right, I'm going to move on then, and just there's one more issue that affects the taxi drivers as well, and that's we have a reply here on the operation. Where is it? About the bus lanes. What item is that? Request for access. Oh yeah, item number 10. Request for access for motorists to bus corridors on bank holidays. And basically, the reply there is that's not. It's not an option open to us anyway, is it?
It is, but we don't actually think it'll be very wise. Like every bank holiday doesn't fall on a Monday. There are bank holidays, there are the public holidays. Every lane would have to have a new sign put up, which adds to the confusion People don't tend to use the bus lanes on Sunday, even though they can legally, because there's a habit and people build up. To just add confusion into that by saying you can't use this on Monday to Saturday, you can use it on Sunday, and you can use it on a bank holiday or a public holiday if it happens to be on a Monday or whatever. Plus the fact that a lot of the major events that happen in the city happen on Monday bank holidays, like the Dublin City Marathon or regularly the Patrick's Day parades, where you do need bus lanes to actually get people in and out of the city. We haven't had any how to put it, groundswell of people saying that they're coming back into town on the bank holiday Monday and they are held up in traffic. There isn't really heavy traffic on bank holidays in the city, so we wouldn't see there's any need for it as of now anyways.